welcome to Fireside Giants. My name is Alex with my co-host here, Anthony Rivardo. Today we got a really interesting topic on the line for you guys. Potential trade candidates for the Giants and maybe ways they can add allocated, draft picks. I think a big thing for the Giants this year is trying to find more ways to get draft capital because we do have, I think, 6 picks right now. And I would prefer to get another second rounder, considering, how impactful they can be. And it seems like Joe Judge and the coaching staff really wants those depth pieces and even starting pieces. We saw Darnay Holmes as a 4th-round pick last year take a starting role at slot corner. They want those guys to be impact players from day one, and I think their drafting is going to get better and finding more draft picks rather, by trading away maybe some people that could be on the block might be a good way to do that. So we want to take a look at some players that could be draft candidates, or rather trade candidates in the coming days, Anthony, and maybe even right during draft day could be a potential thing the Giants could do. But before we dive into those guys, how you doing today?
I'm doing real good. I agree. I think the Giants do need more draft capital. Right now they have 6 picks. They traded one of those away. I think that a team like the Giants should be getting as much draft capital as possible, especially when we ran into a little snafu with the salary cap space going into this offseason, right? We were kind of pressed for space. We made room, but you kind of don't get in that position if you're good at building through the draft. And I think now that the Giants just spent a lot of money, and they have a lot of money tied up in the free agents that they just signed over the next couple of years, I think it's time for them to start really focusing on building through the draft. This was our time. We were big spenders. We got the pieces that we need in free agency. That's great. But now we got to build out the rest of the roster, really flesh it out through the draft. And I think that's where you really build a championship winning team, through the draft. So when you're talking about having certain assets on the Giants roster that could be traded, there aren't many, okay? The Giants don't have a lot of movable assets, but they have a couple, and those few that they could potentially trade could absolutely bring in some draft capital to help us build through the draft just a little bit better. So definitely think this is an interesting topic to discuss, and I think we have some interesting names on this list that we're going to break down right now.
Yeah, let's just get one thing out of the way. Jabril Peppers' name will not come up in this video. Him as a trade candidate will not come up in this video. Some people might say, his money, he has 0 dead cap hit, trading away, might get you a decent draft pick. I am not trading Jabril Peppers. I'm not even considering it. It's not even entering my mind. Just wanted to get that out of the way as a disclaimer before we dive into these players. But the first one on the list, and everyone's going to bring this up, Evan Engram. He's the player that everyone's going to say, if there's anyone the Giants should trade, it's Evan Engram. Why? He dropped 8 passes last year. He was directly correlated to multiple turnovers, including interceptions, and a fumble against Cincinnati. So what do the Giants do? Maybe they want to trade him away and gather some more draft capital. But the question is, what could you get for him? Because he's on the final year of his rookie deal. He's making about, $6 million. That's an increase from last year by a couple million. And, it is his 5th-year option. So if you're going to trade him and get value, now's the time to do it unless you're going to extend him. I personally don't think the Giants are going to extend him, so maybe trading him away wouldn't be a bad idea. But it kind of comes into conjunction with a couple other things. If the Giants were to somehow land Kyle Pitts at 11, which I think, is probably becoming less likely by the day. But since all these teams are trading up to get quarterbacks, there's about a 5-player, 6-player kind of threshold where the Giants could see Kyle Pitts slide to them at 11. If they were to land Kyle Pitts, it opens the door for an Evan Engram trade considerably. It opens up the door for them to find a trade partner on draft day and get rid of him and really get another pick back, Anthony. But I have questions for you. The first one is, in what scenario do you see Evan Engram leaving aside from Kyle Pitts? And 2, what do you think the Giants could get back from him?
I really don't see many scenarios where Evan Engram leaves. I think the Giants are going to emphasize that 12 personnel. So the only real scenario that I see is either the Giants draft Kyle Pitts and they say, okay, now Evan Engram's pretty expendable. Plus, he's going to need a contract pretty soon if we want to keep him around long term. So let's move on from him, get some assets for him before he walks in free agency for nothing. Because Evan Engram is a guy that is probably pretty highly valued by a lot of NFL teams, and I imagine if he does hit the open market as a free agent, someone will pay him probably a lot more than Giants fans expect. He'll probably be overpaid by a team looking for a dynamic offensive weapon because that's what he is. Even though he has a drop problem, he's had blocking problems in the past as well. He is a dynamic offensive weapon that can be a matchup nightmare when you line him up against tight ends and safeties, depending on the offensive scheme that you're in and how you want to play with him, right? So teams are going to value him, and then so that's why I think he'll get more money than people expect in free agency, but at the same time, teams are going to value him, so he's probably our most valuable trade asset on the Giants roster right now as well. I do think teams would value acquiring his talents through a trade, and I think that he could probably end up gaining us a third or fourth round pick for sure. I do feel really comfortable with a fourth for sure for Evan Engram. I think that you could pull a third from Evan Engram in a trade. Why would they trade him, though? Well, okay, you just mentioned, like, Kyle Rudolph is now on the roster. Maybe he's healthy. Maybe the Giants want to go fully with the different style of tight end that Kyle Rudolph provides, because he's really more of a two-facet player, right? He can block, he can catch, he's kind of does both, right? So I think that's what you look at with Kyle Rudolph. If that's how the Giants wanted to play in their offense, they want Kyle Rudolph's playing style as their number one tight end, they might look to move on from Evan Engram, get a third-round pick for him, and then recoup that asset into another position in need, right? So I think that's a scenario where you see Evan Engram get traded, but I don't really think it's too likely. I think the Giants are very high on Evan Engram, a lot higher on Evan Engram than the fans are. I just think that if you are talking about trading Evan Engram, you need a replacement for him, because I don't think that Kyle Rudolph actually is that replacement in terms of a dynamic offensive weapon. So I think, you get Kyle Pitts, absolutely go ahead, trade Evan Engram, get that third-round pick, and invest it into another position in need. I think that's a perfect, ideal scenario for the Giants. I think that Kyle Pitts actually has gold jacket potential entering this draft. He's really such an elite prospect, dynamic prospect. I've seen people compare him to Calvin Johnson, which is kind of bizarre, but I kind of see it in the same right. Like, there are certain elements of him as a prospect that Calvin Johnson had. So, I think if Kyle Pitts is on the board, I feel like the Giants probably have to take him. And in that scenario, yeah, I'm very comfortable moving on from Evan Engram through a trade.
Yeah, I mean, I've even seen people compare Kyle Pitts to Plaxico, as a primary X receiver who can go up and get the ball in 50-50s. But the Giants got Kenny Golladay for that reason. They got him to be an X receiver and really be able to go up and get those 50-50 balls when Daniel Jones needs that blanket, needs that security blanket. And also, we know Jason Garrett loves to utilize those man coverage mismatches. And I think Kenny Golladay is going to be able to dominate those. He's going to attract more attention from safeties. It's going to open up the running game for Saquon. But Kyle Rudolph, I just saw today that there have been whispers that he has a Lisfranc, I think that's how you pronounce it, Lisfranc issue in his foot, which could be very bad, very, very bad, because those things can be lasting, right, Anthony? I mean, what do you think?
Yeah, I'm going to say I'm not super worried about it, because Evan Engram just had the same injury, 2019.
But he's also older.
2020.
He's also older.
Yeah, he is.
A lot older.
I mean, Engram had the same injury 2019, bounced back, was the healthiest he's ever been in 2020. So I don't think that it's necessarily something to freak out about and be super terrified by. I think Kyle Rudolph is a tough SOB, and I think that he's going to be just fine.
Yeah, I mean, I think I would agree. I think he'll be okay. It's not 100% confirmed, so it could be something totally different. I don't know yet for sure, but for the most part, I think Kyle Rudolph is going to bring another element to this offense, and really he's going to be that Jason Witten role. Evan Engram was the only receiver last year that really was able to create separation. He just dropped the football. He actually was doing a decent job getting open. He just dropped the football a lot frequently. So I think that was kind of the problem. Kyle Rudolph doesn't drop the football. He can get into space. He can sit down on curls, sit down on hook routes in the middle of the field and collect passes, and he's not going to drop it. That was kind of a lot of stalled drives. A lot of our losses were direct results of Evan Engram dropping the football, going through his hands, interceptions, whatnot. But you can use Evan Engram more diversely and versatile when he is not being subject to these Jason Garrett hook routes over and over and over again. If you're using 12 personnel, you can use Kyle Rudolph as your sit-down receiver, your sit-down tight end, and then you can take Evan Engram, and this is what Anthony and I were hammered about all last year, drag him across the formation, send him on vertical routes up the seams, do creative things with him, and if you don't have if you're not being doubled, if you're using 12 personnel, there's going to have to be a linebacker or a safety on Kyle Rudolph. You can get those 1v1 matchups for Evan Engram, and he can make those catches. We've seen him do it in the past. I think taking all the pressure away from him is going to benefit him in the long run, because at the end of the day, I think he really just needed another weapon to take the pressure off of him. I think it was majority of it was mental. We spoke to his trainer, or someone at least that trains with him, David Robinson, and he said a lot of those issues were primarily just him in his own head. He can catch the ball. He's a very talented athlete. A lot of it was just in his own head. He was forced to take a lot of responsibility last year because of the lack of weapons. The offense struggling, and I think it really it hurt him in his efficiency and productivity. But Anthony, do you think that increased weapons like Kenny Golladay will actually help him improve in 2021?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that trickle-down effect that I keep mentioning on this podcast keeps coming up because it's real, it's legitimate, and the Giants actually did add talent, and I think that it's going to create better opportunities for the talent that they already had on this roster. I think one of the key players that you're going to see that happen with is actually Sterling Shepard, who we're about to discuss as well. But, of course, with Evan Engram, I think that he's going to probably move into a more defined role now. He's not going to be doing everything that the tight ends have to do in this offense. He's not going to be doing all those hooks, not going to be blocking as much. Kyle Rudolph is going to do a lot of that stuff. I think his more defined role is going to be seeing Evan Engram go vertical, run more crossers, run more, posts, and he ran a really nice route once. It was kind of an out and up, and he like killed it in the red zone with that route. Like, he has the ability to run some really dynamic full route trees, and I think that's exciting for Evan Engram, and I think now he'll have more opportunities to do that in a more defined role now that we have actual weapons on this offense that are going to be getting larger target shares.
Yep, I agree with that. And let's move on to Sterling Shepard, because he is one player that we have predicted as potentially could be a trade candidate for the Giants, and I'll tell you why. I mean, look, just to be straight, I don't want to trade Sterling Shepard, but I see why they would do it, especially if a guy like Jalen Waddle falls to them at 11. And essentially, the reason is, if you look at Sterling Shepard's contract, after 2021, they have an out in his deal. He would count $4 million in dead cap. Alternatively, they could keep him and he would count $10.5 million, and then $11.5 million in 2023. But that out really opens up the door for the Giants, because if they do land Jalen Waddle, Devonta Smith, Jamar Chase, unlikely, or even Kyle Pitts, they have too many receivers. They don't need to spend that much money on Sterling Shepard. They can save the money. They can, alternatively, you don't have to cut him. You can trade him, and then you move the entire contract. You're not on the hook for the dead money anymore. The new team that takes on the contract is. So that's $10 million you open up to utilize in free agency next year if you want to go out and say, let's get a pass rusher. Let's get an above-average pass rusher. We have a little bit of money. You still have to, if you're going to extend Saquon Barkley, you need money for it. If you want to extend Evan Engram, you got Jabril Peppers hitting his 6th year, after his rookie deal. This is his 5th year next year. So you're going to need money. Sterling Shepard might end up being the scapegoat for them to, pay these other guys. But I'd rather them trade Sterling Shepard than cut him and just save the money and the dead cap. You're still getting hit with that with $4 million. Trading him would be my ideal scenario. He still has 2 years, 3 years left if you're considering 2021. And I think he'd be more of a trade deadline trade, in my opinion. I think they would probably keep him around. And then at the trade deadline, a team that needs a receiver, of course, injuries always take precedent, later on in the season, especially for teams that are competing for the playoffs, competing for a potential Super Bowl. There are going to be squads out there that say, we could use a guy like Sterling Shepard. Not only is he a potential elite red zone threat, but he's a very good route runner. He would fit into a majority of schemes pretty well. And I think a team would give up a pretty penny for him. I think at his contract, 2 more years at $10 million, that's a very, very, very cheap contract for a receiver of his caliber. You're seeing high-end wide receiver twos get way more than that. Look what Nelson Aguilar just got. You're seeing receivers get more than that. And I think maybe they could get a 3rd or a late 2nd round pick for him in a trade. Maybe a late 2nd. I probably would settle on a 3rd round pick. But we've seen what the Giants can do with those draft picks. We've seen what Darnay Holmes has to offer. You never know. So, we'll see. But, what do you think about Sterling Shepard? Do you think that he could be someone to consider trading?
Yeah, I definitely think he's someone to consider trading. Now, I personally don't want to see him traded. I love Sterling Shepard. I think he's a great player. And you also mentioned his fit in pretty much every scheme. Like, he does fit in every single scheme just because he's an excellent route runner. That's translatable no matter what the scheme is. He's that guy who can really be scrappy underneath, can run the full route tree. That's Sterling Shepard. He fits in every single scheme because of that. So I think that, instantly makes him more attractive as a trade asset, right? He can fit into any scheme, so any team could trade for him and they could make it work. So that makes his market pretty large. And then I also do think absolutely you can get a 3rd round pick for Sterling Shepard. Now, I would say maybe you could get a 2nd, but let's be real, his play has not been as good the past couple of years, and a lot of that has been due to the fact that he's very injury prone lately. He's been dealing with a lot of injuries. He had some lower body injuries, had a couple concussions, so that's all stuff to keep an eye on. That's all stuff to monitor with Sterling Shepard, and it could actually be a motivating factor for the Giants to move on from Sterling Shepard. The fact that he has dealt with some injuries, they could look at that as a reason to trade Sterling Shepard. So with Sterling Shepard, though, I actually do like his contract. I don't think he's overpaid. I think that's about the fair price that you're paying for a wide receiver 2 in today's NFL market. And I think that when you're talking about should you trade Sterling Shepard, now, It's interesting because I don't want to, because I think that he's an excellent player, and I think that he really is an ideal wide receiver too, or an ideal slot receiver if you want to move him back into the slot. I think he's ideal for that role. Really, really good in that role. We saw that when the Giants had Odell Beckham Jr. He was the wide receiver 1. He got the majority of the targets. But wide receiver 2 with Sterling Shepard had 8 touchdown receptions in his rookie season because he was so good playing that secondary role in relief for when Odell Beckham Jr. is being double, triple teamed, right? So I think now that we have Kenny Golladay, that's the guy who's going to be getting the majority of the defense's attention. Opens up a lot of opportunities for Sterling Shepard, an ideal wide receiver 2. I think that's exciting. But if you were to trade him, the reason that I would want to do it is because A, those injuries that I just mentioned, and B, say the Giants do get a Devontae Smith with the 11th overall pick. Well, I think that Devontae Smith could also be an ideal wide receiver too. Probably has wide receiver 1 potential. I think we all agree for that. He has wide receiver 1 potential. So say you draft him at number 11, absolutely you make him the wide receiver 2 in this offense, and I think that he's perfect in that role because I think you want Kenny Golladay playing that X receiver right up on the line of scrimmage, going up against the press coverage. Devontae Smith, being 170 pounds, probably want him in that Z role, playing that secondary receiver position until he puts on some weight and actually starts to beef up in the NFL and get accustomed to the NFL game, right? So I think he would be ideal in the Giants offense when you look at these wide receivers at the top of the class. Yeah, Jamar Chase, I mean, he's the most NFL ready. He's physical. His outside presence. But the Giants have their X receiver, so their Z receiver is really what they're looking for. So do you want to get really dynamic with one of those explosive guys like Jalen Waddle, or do you want to get a really polished, solid Z receiver in Devontae Smith? I think Devontae Smith makes a lot of sense. So say the Giants were to draft Devontae Smith at 11, I think absolutely you can look into trading Sterling Shepard, or you move him into the slot, but I don't think that's completely necessary. The Giants have Darius Slayton as well. He could play the Z. I think Devontae Smith could play the slot as well if you want to go that route. But actually, that's kind of my hot take that I haven't really heard a lot of people talk about. I think Darius Slayton should actually move into the slot. I don't think he deals well with the press coverage, which is why he's been playing better at Z, even though they've been lining him up a lot at X. I think that he should actually try and move into the slot because I think that's where you can really unleash his vertical prowess going down the middle of the field, because a lot of his best plays have been deep routes down the middle of the field. So that's kind of my hot take, but we can get into that discussion another time. So, yeah, if we're talking about trading Sterling Shepard, though, pretty much rounded all the bases here, covered it all. Basically, only reason I would do it is because we do get a top-tier secondary wide receiver within those first 2 rounds of the draft. It doesn't even have to be the first round. I mentioned all those guys at the top, but you talk about second round, a guy like Kadarius Toney actually makes a lot of sense, has a playing style pretty similar to Sterling Shepard, so he could also make a lot of sense if, for trading away Sterling Shepard. Kadarius Toney could be a pretty solid replacement as well.
You make an interesting point with Darius Slayton, and I personally disagree because I think that Darius Slayton's route tree is just so limited based on what he's capable of doing. I think he's primarily a vertical threat. I think you would agree with that based on what you just said.
Yeah, I would, which is why he's been playing the Z I think he's best as a Z. Or has been best as a Z.
Just
when he plays that X receiver role, he just has not been able to separate, right? That's been our problem. The Giants wide receivers are not separating. Darius Slayton is not separating at all when he's going up against press coverage in that X receiver role. So you put him in the Z. Now he's going to be playing the Z because, we have Kenny Golladay. So he actually could thrive really well there. But I've had this idea in my head that I want to toy around with where I want to see him play in the slot because he actually does run pretty good slant routes. I haven't seen him actually do the full route tree because he's never been given the opportunity to. He pretty much only runs vertical routes. But when I have seen him work underneath on those slants, on those dig routes especially, I know the Giants like to run dig routes from the slot. That's probably his best route. I think he runs a really good dig route. So when I look at stuff like that and I say, how can we minimize the amount of press coverage that Darius Slayton faces? You put him in the slot. He instantly receives less press coverage by being in the slot. So if he can run a more full route tree, if he can expand that part of his game, put that into his repertoire, I think that he could actually thrive in the slot. But it's really just an idea I've toyed with in my head. Haven't really done enough research to make it like this full-on opinion that I have. But I would like to see at least some snaps where Darius Slayton is in the slot, doesn't have any press coverage, and he gets a free release and just gets to run, go straight, go vertical, out of the slot fades. I think slot fades, they should totally throw him on some slot fades. I actually think they have. I know they put Sterling Shepard on some, and it's been very effective. Last year, I know against Philadelphia, he had a really nice reception on a slot fade down the left sideline. So I'd like to see Darius Slayton try and do some more things like that, just to minimize how much press coverage he faces, because I think he's really been struggling against it, and I want to see him actually thrive and get the most out of his skill set, because he's got a pretty solid skill set and he's very physical, which you need in the slot. You have to be very physical. He is, got a big frame, got a big body. And the jumbo slot receiver is a new thing in the NFL. It's starting to become a thing. Michael Thomas actually plays a lot of jumbo slot, which is interesting. So I think that you could try and maybe look into making Darius Slayton a new jumbo slot as a 6'2" slot receiver, with a pretty large body. So that's just kind of my idea there. We can maybe do a film breakdown and look into it and see if there's anything to it.
Yeah, I mean, it's very interesting. When I just see him on the outside, because in my head I'm looking more traditional and more or less thinking, you have Kenny Golladay and Slayton on the outside. You're forcing two deep safeties, which you're taking a guy out of the box, and then you're allowing to open up the run game. And then, if the running game starts to pick up, they have to play more cover one. They have to stack the box a little bit more, and then it allows those guys like Kenny Golladay and Darius Slayton to beat you downfield as X guys on the outside. That's kind of the traditional mindset that I kind of just am going back to. But if you're going to get more creative and get a little bit more experimental, it could be worth a try to move him to slot and be a little bit more experimental, a little bit more modern, and this jumbo slot type of mentality. He just isn't as shifty as you'd want a slot receiver to be. He's not the best route runner. Like, that's why everyone's like, Sterling Shepard's a slot guy, or, Rondell Moore, or even Jalen Waddle. They're just so shifty, and they can make those cornerbacks miss right off the rip. Darius Slayton can't do that all the time. He doesn't have that shiftiness. He's more of a straight line runner with some agility, but it's not enough to justify, in my opinion, at least being an X, or rather a slot. I see the Z. I actually get your Z opinion on that.
Yeah, I think he's a Z. I think he's absolutely a Z receiver, but I'm just saying I think that he's got certain elements to his game that could work well in the slot. And so if the Giants ever are in a spot where their slot receiver, let's say Sterling Shepard is manning the slot this year. Let's say he's out, he's injured. I wouldn't mind seeing Darius Slayton move into the slot and seeing how he could do, is pretty much what I'm trying to say. Because I do think there's certain parts of his game that match well with the slot receiver role. And then I think there's more parts of his game that match well with the Z receiver role. I just don't see him as an X. Everybody wanted him to be an X going into 2020. It didn't work. Right, he kind of struggled. He wasn't getting separation. He was still our leading receiver, and he had a pretty good year, but he definitely wasn't that X receiver that we wanted. Now we have that with Kenny Golladay. I think he really starts to thrive this year in that Z role, and I do think that I think at some point we'll get to see him play some slot receiver in some certain packages, and I think that he'll actually surprise a lot of people because he's kind of underrated with his short route running, and I think that he's got some pretty nice skill sets that could translate to the slot.
Yeah, I think we're going to see Evan Engram slide into that Z and slot role a lot more than usual.
Well, that's jumbo slot. That is prime jumbo slot material.
Exactly.
Like, because when you look at Darren Waller, what he does for the Raiders offense, right, and he plays that jumbo slot very often, I don't know why the Giants haven't had Evan Engram do that more often, right? Like, he should absolutely be lining up slot receiver, jumbo slot, because then you're moving an outside cornerback inside. He's uncomfortable because you got to match up with the size.
It's because it's predictable.
And then you get
predictable, and he was their only weapon, so they wanted him in line so they could do creative things, and they wanted him to bite on the run, and then have him go into a route from an inline position because it was less predictable, and they were so predictable. It was like the only spontaneity.
Yeah, they had a predictable offense. I guess that's fair criticism, fair way to put it, but when I look at Evan Engram, though, he, as a tight end, is a really good route runner. He runs very good routes. I mentioned that earlier. If you were actually to put him in the slot, no press coverage, he just gets to go be physical, run some nice routes, I think you could actually see him start to feast in that jumbo slot role. So, I don't know. I think the Giants, basically, I'm just having this whole discussion now. We kind of moved on. Now we're having this big discussion about slot receivers, jumbo slot receivers, who could fit into what role with the Giants offense. Basically, the crux of what you should get from this conversation that Alex and I just had is the Giants need to be more creative on offense, and we're looking for ways for them to do that. Because they weren't creative last year. It was very vanilla. Jason Garrett's offense was very vanilla at times. We want to see more creativity, and we're kind of just brainstorming different ways to see that happen. And I think there will be more creativity this year. There has to be. 17.5 points per game last year. Not going to cut it. They've said that. I think they're going to get more creative. I think Freddie Kitchens in that senior offensive assistant role is going to help with that a lot. So, yeah, we're just brainstorming creative ways to get these guys into favorable matchups on offense. And I think the Giants are actually going to probably do the same thing, just brainstorm this stuff, but to a much deeper and more analytical sense and extent. So hopefully we see a more creative offense by the Giants next year.
Yeah, we can pray. We can pray with Clapper as our OC, but I think they will do. I think they will do that with the new personnel, and I think they sold the vision to Kenny Galladay as he said verbatim. So I think that whatever they told him, they anticipate making him more of a big part, being more vertical. I think that he probably agrees with what they're trying to do. So obviously it must be something a little bit different than what we saw last year, which I can't imagine any receiver going to and saying this is a great scheme for me. But we did cover Evan Engram as a potential trade candidate. We covered Sterling Shepard. The last one on our list is Will Hernandez, and why? Because he's in the final year of his rookie contract, his fourth year as a second-round pick. Last season, he allowed 1 sack. He allowed 19 hurries and 5 quarterback hits and 25 pressures. So overall, he was good, not great. I'd say he's probably about average. Last year, he was pretty bad in pass blocking, decent as a run blocker. He took a big step backward actually as a pass blocker this past season. And I think it was just because of the change in schematics. Just didn't fit him very well. And because they wanted the guards to be pulling, they wanted them to be more agile, and he just was more power based. He's a stronger guy. I just saw a picture of him with Daniel Jones, and he looks like he's his bodyguard. He's a power blocker. And they wanted guys more agile, like Shane Lemieux was a little bit lighter, a little bit shorter, and more agile. He can pull, he can trap a lot more efficiently than Will Hernandez can. But since the scheme fit might be a little bit of a stretch for Will, he could be a guy that maybe they move to a more of a power scheme in a different team, and he might be able to fetch a 4th-round draft pick. In my opinion, that's probably the max you're getting from him as a average blocker, Anthony. But what do you think he could fetch on the open market in a potential trade?
I don't know how much of a market there is for Will Hernandez. I know offensive linemen are kind of a premium asset pretty much anywhere on the offensive line. And he is pretty average, I think. When he's playing at the top of his game, he's slightly above average, and I think that a team is going to, if they were to trade for Will Hernandez, they would look at that and say, well, we have very below average offensive linemen. We need a guy that can be at least average to slightly above. Will Hernandez might make sense. Let's take a flyer on him, see if a change of scenery can help him turn his career around. That's basically what it would be from the trading team, or the team trading for Will Hernandez's perspective. They would say, we're trying to turn this kid's career around. We're trying to give him a change of scenery where he can actually bounce back from a bad 2020 season, right? And I think that comes cheap, though, because that's a risky thing. You're banking on this guy to turn it around. So that is going to be a cheap trade. And you're probably talking about a 5th, 6th, or 7th round pick probably, which now, the Giants spent a 2nd round pick on Will Hernandez, so you're not recovering the assets the way that you wanted to. You're getting pretty bad return on your investment when you invest a 2nd, and you're probably looking at most a 5th round pick in return for Will Hernandez. But
yeah, it's the late
that's fine. Sometimes you just want to get something in return. You just want to get something back. Cut your losses, get something while you still can. That's one way of looking at it. So, but with Will Hernandez, I think this, Alex. I like him a lot more as a player than I like Shane Lemieux. I'd rather see him start than see Shane Lemieux start. I think he's a much better pass protector. He did struggle in pass protection this year, like a lot of the Giants' offensive linemen did, which is kind of concerning and kind of tells me that there might be something coaching or schematic-based within that. Because Will Hernandez was actually a really good pass protector his first 2 seasons. Even Kevin Zeitler took a step back in pass protection this year. So clearly something was going on with the Giants' offensive line that was more than just player personnel. There's clearly something.
They were just blitzing more. We know this. They were just blitzing more because they just man-covered our receivers and they had more blitzers. Which obviously, if you're getting overwhelmed, you're not going to be able to stop everybody.
Okay, yes, that's true. We were getting blitzed more, but when you look at like the Pro Football Focus analytics of it, right, and the pass protection, the pass blocking grade, that's independent of blitzes. That's true pass sets. How are they grading when it's one-on-one? How are they doing in pass protection? The Giants were just worse this year. Every single player was just worse in pass protection this year than they have been in the past, which is just weird. And I think that there is some sort of correlation to maybe something coaching and fundamentally based or something schematically based where the Giants offensive linemen just were not good in pass protection or were not set up to be good in pass protection. I think there was a problem there, and I feel for Will Hernandez because I do think he's a solid player, and I think he's a really good locker room guy and a great teammate from everything that I've seen. And it looks like he works really hard and he trains really hard. But something just didn't work for him this year. He wasn't able to put it together, and then he lost playing time after he had COVID, and I think that's really unfortunate. So I do feel for Will Hernandez in this sense. But I also do see where fans are coming from when they're saying, yeah, maybe we can just move on from Will Hernandez. It was a mistake. He wasn't the second-round pick we want him to be. Let's just try and get a fifth-round pick.
Right now. We have no one else to replace him.
Yeah, I'm saying post-draft, we're talking this is a trade that would happen probably in August, in the middle of the preseason. That's when this would happen, right? So, I could see fans being all for that, trying to get a fifth-round pick for next year, or even on draft day if they're like, move on from Will Hernandez, get a pick during the draft, something like that. I think this is a hard sell, though, if the Giants are trying to trade Will Hernandez. I think it's a hard sell. I don't know if many people are going to want this just because he is kind of a reclamation project at this point. So I think that's going to be tough for the Giants if they do decide that they want to trade Will Hernandez. But if they do, I think it would make sense as long as they have a pretty solid replacement to put in. If the Giants really feel that Shane Lemieux is that solid replacement, I'm very fearful of that, but I guess the replacement would be on the roster in that scenario. So I don't know. I think the Giants ultimately, though, are going to draft a couple of interior offensive linemen in this year's draft and hopefully try to replace both of those guards that they have on this offensive line.
Yeah, we'll see. We'll see what happens there. But Will Hernandez, he's the last player on our list in terms of being a trade candidate. I think that the Giants can't really afford to move on from him unless they're going to get a guard and then maybe another one to compete with Shane Lemieux. I see Will Hernandez as our starting left guard this upcoming season. I see right guard. I think they're going to draft somebody. I don't think they feel good about going with Shane Lemieux and then having nobody else behind him. Like, think about that realistically. You have Will Hernandez and Shane Lemieux as your starting guards, and you have no depth behind them except for Zach Fulton, who I don't trust with a freaking straw in his hand. So that's like... Anthony disagrees. He thinks, Zach Fulton could be decent. He's a veteran, but look,
I kind of like Zach Fulton. I don't know.
First year in the scheme.
I thought it was a good signing.
First year in the scheme. Sure. Look, it could be a good signing, but he's not starting, in my opinion.
He's not.
I don't trust him.
I don't want him to start. I want to draft a guy. I really desperately want to draft a guy, whether it's in the first or second or third round. We have to draft somebody and hope that they pan out. Because the Giants didn't sign anybody, and I don't think that they will, and I don't think that they should. I think they should build their offensive line through the draft. So, but with Zach Fulton, I think if you're looking at, let's say Shane Lemieux kind of goes out there and is starting, and he's struggling, and people are starting to finally recognize that he's struggling the way that he was struggling in his rookie season. If they recognize that, Zach Fulton, perfect. Go in there, just start playing some snaps, get Shane Lemieux on the bench, get him to recoup, reset, and get Shane Lemieux back out there when he starts playing better. I think Zach Fulton can really provide a lot for the Giants in that regard. And then also with injuries, if there's ever injuries on the offensive line, I think he's a guy that's versatile enough to play pretty much every position on the offensive line and go in there and fill in. So I'm a big Zach Fulton fan. I'm a big supporter of Zach Fulton and that signing. So I don't want to hear any more Zach Fulton slander, Alex.
Yeah, I mean... You could talk up Zach Fulton all you want, but I'm not convinced he's a starting caliber player, or even worth
he's not.
saying.
He's not.
But even worth saying like
was.
Shane, you suck right now, man. We're putting Zach in. You're going from Kevin Zeitler to Zach Fulton. That scares the crap out of me to begin with. DJ, run for your life, man.
You're going from Shane Lemieux to Zach Fulton. That's what you got to think
No,
of
because
it
Shane Lemieux was
our starting
guard.
offensive guard in the second half of the season.
Yeah, at left guard, not right guard. Totally different.
Zach Fulton will play left guard. Yeah, he can play left guard. He can play right guard. He's played multiple positions.
No. I'm saying specifically Shane Lemieux. He's moving to if he moves to right. I'm projecting he moves to right guard. Sorry, I might have missed. You might have missed that part of it.
Word. Yeah.
So if he's gonna play right guard, Will Hernandez is playing left guard. And right guard, you have Shane Lemieux, and you're like, all right, you're not playing well. We're going to pull you right now. We're going to put Zach Fulton in. Now we've really just taken a huge step back on that right side, especially now you have Matt Parrott and Nate Solder, who I trust neither at the moment. You have a problem on that right side of the line. But that goes back to what Anthony said. They got to draft somebody, whether it's Wyatt Davis, whether it's Creed Humphrey, whether it's Rashawn Slater. I don't give a crap. They got to draft somebody. Otherwise, we are in big doo-doo. Eventually, it's going to bite us in the butt. And it will bite us in the butt. These teams have good pass rushers, especially in the NFC East. They have very good pass rushers, so that worries me. But Anthony, do you have anything else left to say before we wrap this up?
The Giants have to fix their offensive line, pretty much. That's the crux of the second half of the conversation. I actually really like how this podcast episode went because we kind of discussed the topic at hand, but also delved into different tangents that related to the topic. Basically, Giants offense needs to be more creative. Giants desperately need to fix their offensive line. That's where these tangents led us to. And I think we had good discussions on those. But really, when you look at the 2021 NFL Draft, it's now a month away. Really exciting stuff there. You know, we've got a ton of content coming out, so stay tuned for all of that. But when you look at that, and you look at where the Giants are right now with their offensive line, they're a team that might actually end up reaching and drafting for need on offensive line within those first 3 rounds. And that could come back to bite us in its own right. But I think the Giants absolutely have to address the offensive line, have to build through the draft. But I think that you could potentially see the Giants maybe skip out on one of those top playmakers or even top defensive playmakers like Michael Parsons just to draft an offensive lineman at 11. I think that's realistic. You could see that happening. And you could take that as you will, whether that's a positive, whether that's a negative. I know a lot of people don't like drafting for need. I'm kind of one of those people. I like BPA, best player available, but I think ultimately the Giants are going to be, their hand is going to be forced, and they're going to have to draft for need at some point in this year's draft because they have to fix this offensive line.
I'll tell you what, with my final statement being this. If you were in the top 15 in the draft, I'm a proponent of best player available. But if you're 15 and below, you're getting into the area that you can draft for need. And I think second and third round, you can 100% draft for need. I am not against that at all. I think if it's a deep class and this is a really, really solid offensive guard class, especially in the second round, you can easily find a guy that you can mold and you can build around. One person in the third round that might still be there, Ben Cleveland. I like Ben Cleveland. I think he's a vicious, he's a mauler. He's like Will Hernandez, he's like Nick Gates. The guy, he finishes, he's strong, he's average in terms of athleticism, but I like him. I think he's a good player. We'll take a look at him and response later in the coming days, get you guys some info on those guys. But, of course, guys, thank you so much for tuning into Fireside Giants. Make sure to hit the notifications on below on Apple and Spotify. Make sure to subscribe on YouTube. We got a new TikTok, so that's pretty cool. Leave the link in the description so you guys can hit that. I'm going to be posting stuff daily there. Some cool stuff that I find, just some interesting things for the Giants related and whatnot. But I hope you guys enjoy that. Of course, I hope you had an awesome weekend. Really, it was beautiful weather. Of course, Sunday was kind of nasty, but Saturday, if you're Jewish, hope you had a great Passover. So a lot more great content to come. Anthony mentioned it, but really happy to be providing you guys with elite level stuff, and we will catch you guys on the next video.